Welcome to the mystery of life.
Jonestown was a remote settlement in Guyana, a country on the northern mainland of South America. It was a U.S.-based cult established by the People's Temple under the leadership of Jim Jones. Jonestown gained worldwide attention when on November 18, 1978, a total of 918 people died at the settlement and at Guyana's capital city of Georgetown. All but 2 from apparent cyanide poisoning. Many were injected against their will, but most willingly drank the poison. Many of whom were children. Words like mass suicide, massacre, or mass murder are used to describe the deaths in Jonestown and Georgetown. These terms have changed over time. Under the instructions of Jim Jones, his followers armed with guns and crossbows were ordered to shoot anyone who tried to escape. The People's Temple was formed in 1955 by Jim Jones in Indianapolis, Indiana. The main teachings of the temple were based in Christian revival movements, but emphasized on the practice of communalism and radical sharing, something Jones called apostolic socialism. The temple preached that those who remained drugged with the opiate of religion had to be brought to enlightenment, socialism. Ever since he was young, Jones was interested in people like Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, and Adolf Hitler. He would later often praise Stalin and Vladimir Lenin as his heroes. Jones was fascinated with the power of religion and how much influence it has over people. He was also not happy with the persecution against the Communist Party USA. While on his way to a temple mission in Brazil in the early 1960s, Jones visited a then British colony by the name of Guyana. At home in the USA, Jones had been receiving a lot of criticism in Indiana for his views. This led him to move the temple to Redwood Valley, California, in 1965. In the early 1970s, the temple opened other branches in Los Angeles and San Francisco. It would eventually move its headquarters to San Francisco. The temple proved to be of important influence in the political world. It undoubtedly helped George Moscone win the mayoral election in 1975. As reward, Moscone appointed Jones as the chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission. This opened the door for Jones to gain access to several high-ranking political figures, including vice presidential candidate Walter Mondale and First Lady Rosalind Carter. In the fall of 1973, newspaper articles by Lester Kinsolving and the defection of 8 temple members pressured Jones to take action. Jones and the temple's attorney Tim Stone prepared an immediate action plan in case of a police or media crackdown. Kinsolving accused Jones and his temple for physical abuse, financial misdeeds, and suspect theology. While exploring their options, plans included fleeing to Canada, Barbados, or Trinidad. The temple chose Guyana as its Caribbean missionary post. It conducted research on its economy and extradition treaties with the U.S. In October 1973, the directors of the temple decided to establish an agricultural mission in Guyana. Jones believed that Guyana was a good fit for the temple. Guyana was small, poor, and independent enough for him to easily gain influence and protection by the local government. He was masterful in presenting the Guyanese government the benefits of allowing the People's Temple to establish a settlement in the country. One main advantage, Jones claimed, was the American presence near Guyana's disputed border with Venezuela. This idea sounded promising to the local government, who feared an invasion by the Venezuela military. In 1974, after traveling to an area of northwestern Guyana with Guyanese officials, Jones and the temple agreed to a lease of over 3,800 acres. The land was mainly in the jungle located 150 miles west of the Guyanese capital of Georgetown. It was beneficial for the local government because the site was located near the disputed border with Venezuela. The area was isolated and the soil was of low fertility. The nearest body of water was 7 miles away by muddy roads. The construction of Jonestown began with 500 members, while more are encouraged to come. To Jim Jones, his creation would become a socialist paradise and a sanctuary, far away from media scrutiny. In 1974, the Guyanese officials allowed the temple to bring in certain items duty-free. Kickbacks and payoffs helped the temple bring in shipments of firearms and drugs through Guyanese customs. To convince the Guyanese government of mass migration to the settlement, Jones claimed that his members were skilled and progressive, while presenting a large envelope containing $500,000. Jones also said that he would invest most of the group's assets in Guyana. Jonestown showed itself to be a benevolent communist community. Jones stating, "I believe we're the purest communists there are." Jones' wife, Marceline, described Jonestown as dedicated to live for socialism, total economic and racial and social equality. He wanted to build a model community, and claimed that Burnham couldn't rave enough about us, the wonderful things we do, the project, the model of socialism. Interestingly, Jones did not permit members to leave Jonestown without his permission. In the summer of 1977, Jones and several hundred temple members officially moved to Jonestown. Jones left the same night that an article detailing allegations of abuse by former temple members was to be released. After the mass migration, Jonestown became overcrowded, with its population slightly under 900 at its peak in 1978. Many members of the temple believed in Jones' promises that Guyana would be a paradise or utopia. After Jones arrived, however, Jonestown life significantly changed. Entertaining movies that the settlers had watched were mostly cancelled in favor of Soviet propaganda shorts and documentaries on American social problems. Resources had to be reallocated for political reasons. Buildings fell into disrepair. Weeds overgrown on fields. School study and nighttime lectures for adults turned into Jones' rants about revolution and enemies. Concerns grew of mercenaries sent by Tim Stone, who had defected from the temple and turned against the group. For the first several months, temple members worked 6 days a week, from approximately 6:30 in the morning to 6 in the evening, with an hour for lunch. After the day's work ended, temple members would attend several hours of activities in a pavilion, including classes in socialism. Jones compared this schedule to the North Korean system of 8 hours of daily work followed by 8 hours of study. This practice was in line with the temple's idea of gradually subjecting its followers to complex mind control and other behavior modification techniques. Jones borrowed these tactics from Kim Il-sung's Korea and Mao Zedong's China. Jones would often read news from Moscow and Havana. He would have so-called discussions with individual followers about how to read certain news events. Soviet documentaries, political thrillers such as The Parallax View, The Day of the Jackal, State of Siege, and Z were repeatedly watched and analyzed by Jones down to minute details. Recordings of these meetings would later show how livid and frustrated Jones would get when anyone did not find the films interesting, or did not understand the message Jones was laying upon them. Jones' recorded readings of the news were broadcasts over Jonestown's tower speakers. All members could hear them throughout the day and night. Jones' news readings portrayed the U.S. as a capitalist and imperialist villain, while casting socialist leaders in a positive light. Jonestown communicates with the outside world through a shortwave radio. All voice communications with San Francisco and Georgetown were transmitted using this radio, from routine supply orders to confidential temple business. The FCC cited the temple for violations because it was using amateur frequencies for commercial purposes. The temple felt that the FCC's threats to revoke its operators' licenses was a threat to Jonestown's existence. Because it stood on poor soil, Jonestown had to bring in large amounts of commodities, such as wheat. Temple members lived in small communal houses, and ate rice, beans, greens, and occasionally meat, sauce, and eggs. Despite having access to an estimated $26 million by late 1978, Jones also lived in a tiny communal house. Jones' house had a small refrigerator containing, at times, eggs, meat, fruit, salads, and soft drinks. In February 1978, half the community fell ill, with problems such as severe diarrhea and high fevers. Although Jonestown had no prison and no form of capital punishment, some forms of corrective action were used against members that were known to have serious problems. They could be locked in a small plywood box, or forcing children to spend a night at the bottom of a well, sometimes upside down. This torture hole, along with beatings, were becoming rumors that fell on the ears of local Guyanese. An extended care unit, supplied with drugs such as thorazine, sodium pentothal, chlorohydrate, Demerol, and Valium were ready for members who attempted to escape. Armed guards patrolled the area day and night to enforce Jonestown's rules. Children were generally placed into communal care, and at times were only allowed to see their biological parents briefly at night. Jones was called father or dad by both adults and children. 33 infants were born in the community nursery. For a year, the commune was financially operating through the members' social security checks. Up to $65,000 in monthly welfare payments from U.S. government agencies to Jonestown residents were signed over to the temple. In 1978, officials from the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown interviewed Social Security recipients many times to make sure they were not being held against their will. The embassy interviewed 75 members. Not one said that they were being held captive, were forced to sign over welfare checks, or wanted to leave Jonestown. Jones would often tell members that the CIA and other intelligence agencies were conspiring with capitalist pigs to destroy the settlement. Jones was known to regularly study Adolf Hitler and Father Divine to learn how to manipulate members of the cult. He learned well to find an enemy, and to make sure people know who the enemy is. By doing so, it will unify the group and make the people in the group obey his commands. On at least 2 occasions, a simulated mass suicide was rehearsed as told by a defector. Everyone, including the children, was told to line up. As we passed through the line, we were given a small glass of red liquid to drink. We were told that the liquid contained poison and that we would die within 45 minutes. We all did as we were told. When the time came when we should have dropped dead, Reverend Jones explained that the poison was not real and that we had just been through a loyalty test. He warned us that the time was not far off when it would become necessary for us to die by our own hands. After Jones obtained a jeweler's license in 1976, the temple had continued to receive monthly half-pound shipments of cyanide, supposedly to clean gold. Jones's paranoia and drug usage increased in Jonestown. He became more and more fearful of a government raid on the commune. He believed that the community would not be able to resist an attack. He would conduct drills to prepare his people for the siege. Jones would call alert. Alert! Alert! Over the community loudspeaker to call everyone together in the central pavilion. Armed guards with guns and crossbows would surround the pavilion. One drill lasted for 6 days. The frightened local Guyanese surrounded the settlement with machetes and home-made weapons, fearing whatever is happening in the commune. After the 6-day siege drill, Jones no longer believed the Guyanese could be trusted. He directed temple members to consider another exodus by the temple. Although Jones and his supporters liked the idea about moving to the Soviet Union, he had a change of heart. He'd rather stay within the Guyanese borders because the sovereignty it gave them. In late 1977 and early 1978, concerned relatives began writing letters to the U.S. Secretary of State and the Guyanese government, and traveled to Washington, D.C. to try and start an investigation. Harvey Milk, who was supported by the temple, wrote a letter to President Jimmy Carter defending Jones as a man of the highest character, stating that temple defectors were trying to damage Reverend Jones' reputation with apparent bold-faced lies. On April 11, 1978, the concerned relatives distributed a packet of documents, including letters and affidavits, titled An Accusation of Human Rights Violations by Reverend James Warren Jones, to the People's Temple, members of the press, and members of Congress. In June of that same year, more stories detailing alleged crimes by the temple and substandard living conditions in Jonestown were released. During the summer of 1978, Jones sought the legal services to help make the case of a grand conspiracy by U.S. intelligence agencies against the temple. Jones' attorney, Lane, spoke to the residents of Jonestown, providing support for Jones' theories and comparing him to famed civil rights movement leader Martin Luther King Jr. Lane then held press conferences stating that none of the charges against the temple are accurate or true, and that there was a massive conspiracy against the temple by intelligence organizations, naming the CIA, the FBI, and even the U.S. Post Office. It was revealed that Jones was paying Lane $6,000 per month to generate such theories. Jones' health declined greatly in Jonestown. In mid-1978, his wife began managing more of the settlement's operations. He was told he had a possible lung infection. As a ploy to gain sympathy, Jones announced to his followers that he had lung cancer. He felt he needed to strengthen support within the community. It was said Jones was abusing drugs such as Valium, Quaaludes, stimulants, and barbiturates, which caused his health to deteriorate. He would complain about having insomnia. He would often say he went for 3 or 4 days without any rest. During meetings, his once sharp speaking voice often sounded slurred, words become jumbled. He would occasionally not finish sentences even when reading reports over the commune's PA system. In the early morning of November 18th, 11 temple members sensed danger enough to walk out of Jonestown, going all the way to the town of Matthews Ridge, in the opposite direction from the Port Kaituma airstrip. After a delegation party visit to Jonestown, Jones' wife, Marceline Jones, made a broadcast on the public address system. She stated that everything was all right and asked residents to return to their homes. During this time, aides prepared a large metal tub with grape flavor aid, poisoned with diphenhydramine, promethazine, chlorpromazine, chloroquine, chloral hydrate, diazepam, and cyanide. Dr. Larry Schacht, Jonestown's very own in-house doctor, helped prepare the deadly mix. Dr. Schacht was a former methamphetamine addict who got sober with Jones' help years earlier. Jones had helped pay for Larry's college education to become a doctor. Schacht had been returning the favor by researching the best ways for a person to die, in preparation for the mass suicide, or rather, mass murder. About 30 minutes after Marceline Jones's announcement, Jim Jones made his own announcement, calling all members immediately to the pavilion. When everyone had gathered around, Jones told his people about the delegation's air travel back to Georgetown. He said, "One of those people on that plane is gonna shoot the pilot. I know that. I didn't plan it, but I know it's gonna happen. They're gonna shoot that pilot, and down comes the plane into the jungle, and we had better not have any of our children left when it's over, because they'll parachute in here on us." Perhaps it was the inevitable truth, or perhaps it was heightened paranoia that led Jones to believe that his dream was over. Several other temple members gave speeches praising Jones and his decision for the community to commit suicide. Even Jones stopped appreciating this praise and begged for the process to go faster. The first to take the poison were Roletta Paul and her 1-year-old infant. A syringe without a needle fitted was used to squirt poison into the infant's mouth. Then Roletta squirted another syringe into her own mouth. Stanley Clayton also witnessed mothers with their babies approach the tub containing the poison. Clayton watched Jones going up to people to encourage them to drink. People were reluctant to die after they saw the poison begin to take effect on themselves and on others. The poison caused death within 5 minutes for children, and less for babies, and an estimated 20 to 30 minutes for adults. After consuming the poison, people were escorted away down a wooden walkway leading outside the pavilion. Some initially thought it was all just another rehearsal. As Jones watched people begin to show signs of death, he counseled, "Die with a degree of dignity. Lay down your life with dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony." Jones also said, "I tell you, I don't care how many screams you hear. I don't care how many anguished cries. Death is 1,000,000 times preferable to 10 more days of this life. If you knew what was ahead of you, you'd be glad to be stepping over tonight." Rhodes described a scene of both hysteria and confusion as parents watched their children die from the poison. Most quietly waited their own turn to die. Many walked around like they were in a trance. Cries and screams of children and adults were easily heard on the tape recording. As more temple members died, eventually the guards themselves were called in to die by poison. Jones was found dead lying next to his chair in the pavilion between two other bodies, his head cushioned by a pillow. Jones died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his left temple as confirmed by the Guyanese medical examiner. Jonestown was the greatest single loss of American civilian life in an intentional act until the terrorists' attack of September 11, 2001. I will be releasing a video on Jeffrey Dahmer shortly. Dahmer was an American serial killer and sex offender who had sex and ate pieces of his dead victims. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. Be sure to also hit the like button and the bell if you're enjoying these videos. I hope we can explore the mystery of life together again. Until next time, goodbye.